So many games on those walls. Which one should I play today? Klax? I don't think so. It's no longer the 90s. There's no time for Klax. So what else we have up there? This one? No, I'd rather not, thank you. No. Pick up something else. Alright, fine. Since you have a rather baffling obsession with this game, I suppose we could spend some time with this high-tension action puzzle game on this week's somewhat preachy episode of Davey and Goliath. In 1989, Atari was involved in a bitter dispute with Nintendo over the rights to a home version of Tetris. Atari's version, released as an unlicensed cart under their Tengen label, was based on their 1988 arcade version. Though they had eventually lose to Nintendo, they already had a follow-up action hybrid puzzle game ready for the arcades. That game, in case you couldn't tell by the title of this video you clicked on, was Klax. So wait a spell, what exactly does Klax even mean? Besides being a high-scoring Scrabble word a common noun, the name Klax was chosen rather haphazardly. Mark Steven Pierce, one of Atari's principal game designers at the time, and programmer Dave Akers wanted a nice short title to match the game's simplicity and stand in contrast to Pierce's previous complex game project, Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters. Akers, noticing the blocks made little click-clack noises as they tumbled down, came up with the mashed-up name Klax almost immediately. Though there's no doubt Pierce and Akers were looking to ride the puzzle game momentum created by Tetris, Klax is a completely different beast, not only in gameplay but also in style. Compared to Tetris's folksy old-world Russian motif replete with squat dancers, Klax was hip and modern, with noisy playing pieces running atop factory conveyor belts, tricked out with boingy gizmos, all juxtaposed against incongruent backgrounds. Klax made no secret that it wanted to be the ambassador to the final decade of the 20th century, though as it turned out, mainstream pop culture failed to get that memo. This is likely why I can't seem to find anyone wearing one of those advertised official t-shirts. Klax follows your standard match 3 puzzle game rule that was also found in Sega's columns and countless games you have on your smartphone right now. You have a bin that holds 5 columns of 5 tiles each, and since you have a lot more than 25 tiles to contend with, you'll have to make matches to clear out some space. Vertical matches are the easiest, but only net you 50 measly points. Horizontal matches are a little harder, but give you 1,000 points. And finally, diagonals are worth a whopping 5,000 points, but take a bit of planning ahead. Each match of 3 or more is called a Klax. Matching 4 tiles counts as 2 Klaxes, and a 5 in a row is 3 Klaxes. Klax separates your goals into waves. You begin the game by choosing one of the 3 starting waves. Starting at a higher level gives you generous bonus points upon completion of the wave, and more leeway with drop tiles, which is a good thing since filling up the drop meter is one way to end your game. Each wave has a specific objective. The easiest waves simply require you to complete a certain number of Klaxes. Other waves require you to get a certain number of diagonals, score a certain amount of points, complete a number of horizontal Klaxes, or survive a predetermined number of tiles. Some waves designate themselves as warp waves and will let you jump levels if you do things like make a giant X in your drop bin, or other things. There are 100 waves total. Now while it all sounds rather simple, the game is anything but. Early waves ease you in and you'll likely be able to pull off some high-scoring Klaxes, but after a few levels, you find yourself frantically scrambling. Your paddle holds only 5 tiles and drops them in a last-on, first-off manner, which is really easy to forget. You can flip a tile back up temporarily, but it's also a great way for more tiles than you could handle coming to greet you at the front of the line. Thankfully, there are those wild tiles that flash multiple colors, but I always panic and waste it on a low-rent vertical Klax. Klax is one of those games that benefits from its rather unconventional sound effects. Besides the click-clack of the tiles, there's no background music to speak of, save for the distinctive melody that plays for each kind of Klax. Vertical, horizontal, and diagonal. Meanwhile, an unseen peanut gallery provides gameplay critique. Failing to catch a tile will unleash a comical scream, while pulling high point 4 and 5 block Klaxes will be rewarded with an impressed female voice. Ooh. Completing a wave will earn you a few seconds of mild applause, while failing will be met with disapproving groans. All these sounds really add a lot of charm to an otherwise straightforward puzzle game.
Klax wave.
and is sorely missed in home ports on hardware that can't include these digitized clips for whatever reason. Speaking of ports, home versions of Klax were quickly released for the major consoles at the time: the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Genesis, and the TurboGrafx-16. Simultaneous multi-platform releases were quite unusual around this time, as Nintendo still had those strict rules for publishers that prevented them from releasing the same games for competitors' hardware. It did help that the NES version, like a lot of Tengen's contributions, were unlicensed and unauthorized by Nintendo, meaning they were not bound by these rules. Oddly enough, there was a Game Boy release that was licensed, albeit published by Mindscape. Klax also holds the distinction of being the last game made for the Atari 2600, although it was only released in PAL regions. One of the best ports existed on the Atari Lynx handheld, as it not only captured all the sights and sounds of the arcade, but also let you play with the screen oriented vertically to fit the entire depth of the conveyor belt without shrinking the graphics. There was going to be an Atari 7800 version. Man, I've been talking about that console a lot lately, but it was cancelled. This version would have added 3 more impossible waves. Impossible in quotes. The Game Boy Color version of Klax contains a hidden wedding proposal planted by programmer Mike Mika. It took his girlfriend 3 years to uncover it, and even then, only after the code to unlock it was published, addressing her by name, in Tips and Tricks magazine. By the way, she said yes. Later ports were handled by Midway after they purchased Atari games in 1996. Klax ended up on Volume 1 of their Arcade Treasures collection for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Bottom line, name a console and there's a good chance you can play Klax on it. Not you, Super Nintendo, unless you use the Super Game Boy. But it was the Sega Genesis version that was hurled my way, so let's take a quick look at this one. How does it stack up to the arcade original? How do you stack up? You tell me. As expected, the Genesis version is missing some sound effects, namely the wave announcements. However, the rest of the sounds, the oohs, ahs, claps, and groans, are all present, so it's not really that big of a loss. The 3 pieces of Klax fanfare music is not as sharp and less distinct from one another, but I'm picking nits here. The Genesis version of Klax lets you tweak the game in many different ways. You have multiple difficulty settings, which affects how many wild tiles you encounter. You could also turn on and off the difficulty ramping, that is, the longer you play, the faster it gets. If you have it off, the speed remains consistent. You could choose how many credits you have before your score resets when continuing, since, like in the arcade, the high score table keeps track of overall score and the average per credit. Not that it matters, the table is reset when you turn the power off, and a high Klax score no longer qualifies you for promotion at work like it used to back in the early 90s. The Genesis version also features some background music you could turn on and off, in case the clickety-clack blocks alone is a tad nerve-wracking. After all is said and done, the gameplay is quite faithful to the arcade version. If you are the Klax master at your local game center, your skills will translate to the Genesis cartridge as well. Overall, I have to say that I like the idea of Klax more than the game itself. It's a fine puzzle game, but the frantic march of those tiles on even the earliest levels is unforgiving at times, keeping me from reaching that level of satisfying zen I get from other puzzle games. The game encourages you to make complex chains and patterns, but with 10 different tiles, thinking ahead is often moot. I almost never get the combination I need before I have to abandon my complex Klax plans to keep from getting a game over. Maybe it's just that I'm really terrible at this game. Still, even though the 90s are long over, Klax holds up as a decent game. It's quirky enough to make up for its unremarkable Match 3 premise. It won't be sitting anywhere near Tetris in the Puzzle Game Hall of Fame, but if you're looking for a challenging puzzler dressed in wacky clothing, Klax will surely satisfy. This was Dave for TV Games, incessantly reminding you to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you back here next time.